Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this episode, John Maher, Grass 10 Campaign Manager, discusses key actions farmers need to take with current drought situations on farm.
The grass situation on farms is very variable around the country. You have counties like Kerry, Waterford, Cork, growing pretty close to normal. They obviously got rain not so long ago and a nice bit of it, and haven't been suffering the soil moisture deficits then of, say, the eastern parts of the country, which are very close to drought conditions, and on some farms drought conditions already exist. So if we go by soil moisture deficits, once you get beyond 75 millimeters of soil moisture deficit, you really are into very low growth. So most of the country is somewhere between, I suppose, 30 to 60 millimeters of soil moisture deficit. They will have some growth, but growth will be curtailed. Where you have a soil moisture deficit of 30 mils, or between 0 and 30 mils, growth is normal. People forget that. The first inch of soil moisture deficit, or 25 mils, the growth is not affected. Once you go beyond 30 mils, growth starts to decline. Once you go beyond 50 mils, growth starts to really decline. And once you go beyond 75 mils of soil moisture deficit, growth is very low indeed. And that's very much probably becoming the commonplace now in the eastern counties, places like Dublin, Meath, Louth, Wicklow, to a lesser extent, I suppose, but Carlow, Kildare, Kilkenny are also suffering poor with drought conditions, or suffering poor growth. Then the rest of the country is somewhere between what I would call restricted growth and drought conditions, and then the south of the country, or the southwest, is at normal growth currently, but given the projected, and I stress projected, forecasts, it won't be long before they will enter into lower levels of growth in time as well. So if we look at the growth rates then very quickly, a lot of the country is still growing on average 60 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day, right? From pasture-based figures, we know that. We understand that if rainfall doesn't arrive in sizable quantities, that obviously those growth rates will decline. When we look at the growth rates then for the eastern parts of the country, or the places where drought is becoming more prevalent, the growth rates are much lower, and there are probably feed supply issues there existing on those farms. But even within that, there's a fair degree of variation in growth rate, and even in the eastern parts of the country, or the eastern bloc, you still have growth rates between 40 and 50. Now, I know they will come down without rain, but at the moment, countrywide, we're not too bad yet. But I suppose, given that there's little rain in the forecast, and we've had a very dry April, May, and now start of June, feed issues will start to arise more so.
The impact of growth restrictions on farms is very variable, and demand is variable on some dry stock farms, with some having a low daily demand for grass and only needing minor tweaks, while others will have a high demand, so will need to look at their own individual situation. With current soil moisture deficits, what current actions do farmers need to take now in both situations?
Yeah, the growth rates I'm given are the average across the country, across enterprises, whether it's dairy farms, beef farms, sheep farms, from pasture base. Within that, then there's variation within farm and variation within region of the country. And obviously, you have some farms that have a big demand or a bigger stocking rate in those parts of the country then, where you have restricted growth and a large demand, or herd demand, or flock demand. The feed issues will arise faster. There are some farms then in both parts of the country where growth is reasonable and where growth is poor, which demand is much lower. So some farms only have a demand maybe of 30 or 40, yet are growing 50 or 60. Other farms have a demand maybe of 30 or 40, yet maybe only growing 30, so they will be in trouble. So yes, the demand is a factor. If you're lowly stocked, your demand will be lower. If you're highly stocked, your demand will be higher. So where feed supply is starting to come under under pressure or grass supply starting to come under pressure, then you have to start looking at different options. And effectively, you're trying to reduce the demand on the farm. So options include maybe you might graze some silage ground. You might decide to bring in some of the forward animals like bulls or forward stores or heifers or forward bullocks and bring them into the house and fatten them, thereby lowering the demand on the farm and taking pressure off the grazing block on the farm. You may decide to do something with autumn calvers and wean them early, so all different options exist. You may decide to park some animals up in a paddock or a field and give them round bale silage and leave grass for other animals. So it's a question of where you are in terms of feed supply on the farm and try and hold that. And our objective at this point, as we enter into difficulty with drought conditions, is to protect the growth on the farm and hold the grass supply. So in terms of numbers, then very quickly, we want to hold the farm cover above 500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare for those who measure, or to maintain, somewhere about a 25 to 30-day rotation length, looking forward now, not looking behind. So what I mean by that is, if you have a 100-acre block, it basically, and you want to keep a 25-day rotation, that means you don't go faster than, 4 acres per day or about 28 acres for the week. You have to try and hold the supply of grass on the farm. If you don't, and you run the grass supply down very fast, the principle of grass grows grass gets removed, and you end up with running out of grass very, very quickly. So, you either have two options: you bring in more feed, or you reduce the demand for feed on the farm in terms of grass. And in many cases, people will probably do a little bit of both. We also have to look at the animals on the farm. Some are more productive than others, and where you have less productive animals or low value stock, maybe they should, at this point in time, as you enter into a feed supply issue, that you decide to offload some of those animals because they are either low value, low return, and consuming feed on the farm, that's going to get more valuable, and thereby also increasing demand on the farm. So if you could offload them, you reduce demand and you're not consuming valuable feed on the farm with low productive stock.
And for some farmers that are feeding out silage at the moment, what should they be aware of?
Yeah, this question is quite common about silage. I'll be honest with you, like if people have made silage in the last week or two, I don't want to open the pit. I don't want to do that. I want to let preservation do its thing and fermentation take place. Round bales of hay or round bales of silage are options, and there are serious options to be considered. Where you've made bales in, over a month ago, no problem feeding those. Bales that are made last week, this week, 2 weeks ago, maybe even in the last few days on a different part of the farm, they can be fed immediately. Like there's no problem feeding bales immediately if they're only made in the last week, 2 days, 10 days, whatever the case may be. But one rule applies: when you open a freshly made bale, it must be consumed quickly. And that's the point I'm making. So some people will say to me, look, I want to feed 10 bales over 5 days, right? So that's basically, if you do quick numbers on it, that's 2 bales a day. Well, the reality is you need to, instead of feeding 10 bales over 5 days, you need to feed 2 bales a day and consume them within the day. Otherwise, they start heating and start going off. So there's no problem feeding freshly made bales as long as they're consumed within what I would call a 24-hour to 36-hour period. After that, they will start to spoil, heat, and go off, and the animals won't like them. But freshly made bales, no problem as long as we consume them fast. That's the secret. So for many, round bales will be fed to animals that are either being fattened inside or speed finished, or animals that are being consumed them out in paddocks in whatever feeder system you're operating. So they must be consumed fast if they're freshly made. But the animals will have no problem eating them. And look, the reality is, over the last 2 months, silage making conditions have been excellent because you've had high levels of sunshine, dry ground, so it has been easy enough to make silage. And we also know that the nitrates have been very low in silage samples tested for silage making, and we know the sugars have been high. So that's excellent in terms of silage making conditions. So there should be no problem as long as they're consumed fast.
And in some situations there where you mentioned silage has been harvested on most farms, in some cases growth has been poor. Is there a benefit to letting it grow on and bulk up?
Yeah, okay, this is not an uncommon question, and we have to go back and learn, from what happened in 2018. Now, I accept that spring in 2018 was a different spring. It was very difficult. We had very cold spring. We had snow. It was very late. We had a wet autumn in 17, and so basically the cupboard was bare in terms of feed when we came out of spring in 2018. People were on the chase to make big quantities of winter feed, and the temptation was, which did happen as well, to cut late and cut big cuts. The problem with that was, in the end, is that while there was a big first cut made, because the cuts were so heavy, you ended up with a very white base in the sward. Drought got into it, and its production for the rest of the year was very, very poor. So while there is an advantage of cutting large volumes of silage and cutting later and getting a big bulk of feed, the counterbalance to that argument is that you will have very, very slow recovery. You open up the sward more to drought, and the reality is that the grass production for the rest of the year could be well down. So on one hand you may gain in winter feed, but on the other hand you may lose future grass production, whether it's for grazing or for silage. So to be honest, we have been in the Grass 10 team encouraging people to cut the silage when it's ready to cut. Silage making conditions are excellent. Nitrates are low, sugars are high. The earlier cut, the faster recovery. If rain comes, recovery will be fast. Where you cut large volumes of silage, it's very hard in the sward, very slow recovery, and there is a risk, given that the cupboard is bare in moisture, that the production from that paddocks or fields the rest of the year could be quite poor. So why wouldn't you take advantage of the super silage making conditions at the moment, cut the crop that's there, quality will still be good, rather than delaying it a week or 2 weeks into June. You just couldn't let the super conditions go in terms of nitrates being low, sugars being high, super ground conditions, and trying to get a faster recovery for the next crop of grass, whether that's silage or grazing.
So cut now and allow recovery.
Exactly, yeah.
Where second cut silage is being closed at the moment, what advice have you in relation to applying slurry or fertilizer?
Okay, so it's a very good question, right? And I suppose to answer the question was like where you're going for second cut silage. Right, we have to watch the weather forecast in terms of rain. There's a possibility of some rain this week. I would be anxious to get slurry and fertilizer out on those cut areas before that rain comes, to help to get the fertilizer in particular washed into the soil. The rule of thumb is, to be honest, slurry first, fertilizer afterwards. But if we get some rain during the middle of this week, you'll have to take advantage of trying to get fertilizer out for a second cut. Some people are hedging their bets, and I can understand that, in that they will apply a certain amount of fertilizer, maybe half the requirement for second cut, because they may end up grazing the field. If rain comes, that can be topped up then for second cut. If rain doesn't come, you may end up grazing it. You haven't put out 50, 60, 70, 80 units of fertilizer, and effectively ends up grazing the field, so you haven't wasted the fertilizer. If you applied 30, 40 units of a compound fertilizer, and I'd prefer a compound fertilizer to replace the P's and K's and silage. I also want sulfur, because sulfur is important in drought conditions. So I'd be looking at a compound fertilizer for second cut, probably having my bets on that at this point in time, and to see what way the weather turns out, but to try to get a spread before any possibility of rain this week. Some people who have cut silage ground earlier took advantage of the rain about 10 days ago, got the slurry out, then got the fertilizer out, and are in a much better place because the nutrients have now been washed into the soil and the recovery is not bad. But the windows of rain are important here, and if they do come, you have to try and get the fertilizer out before that comes to get it washed into the soil. You're dealing with bare ground, so like the trapping of dew and all is there's not going to be much moisture around. So where the rainfall is, if there's rainfall coming, try and have the fertilizer out beforehand. And if you want to hedge your bets and apply half now, at least then you have fertilizer out, the crop recovering, And if more rainfall comes then and things alleviate, you can send that crop onto second cut silage. But if you end up grazing because of your short, then you haven't, wasted fertilizer as such for grazing. You have enough out for grazing, but not waste the fertilizer that would have gone for silage. Yet you end up grazing the field. For some farmers, they have out farms and it's going to be silage production. So, there's no animals going to go to that, and that's fine, or it's too far away. So, you'll probably apply enough fertilizer and slurry to try and target a second crop. Just to be clear, though, if you apply fertilizer and no rain comes, or you have to wait for the rain to come, but it's not as if this fertilizer is going to be lost or anything like that, or the slurry nutrients are going to be lost. You just have to wait for the rain to come.
So nevertheless, from Pasture Base Ireland, we can see that everywhere is growing some grass at the moment. In relation to fertilizer, how much fertilizer should farmers be applying at the moment?
Yeah, so we talk about a unit of day of fertilizer for reasonably stocked farms for every day in the rotation. However, given the current prevailing conditions and given the current projected weather conditions in terms of lack of rainfall, grass is going to come under stress. There's no doubt about that. So you're going to see probably a little bit more stem and more seed heading than you will before. To help alleviate the stress, then we actually prefer a compound fertilizer to go out. So we know that, for example, K or potash is important in moisture control in the grass plant. So given the current conditions, you'd like to have some K going out. We know sulfur is important in terms of the conditions we have at the moment, where drought conditions start to prevail. The plant has a greater need for sulfur. So we'd like some sulfur. We obviously like some nitrogen, probably, a unit a day or 20 units for the month for those who are lower stocked, right, of nitrogen. And then if you have an allowance for P, we'd like some P to go out as well, because P helps the plant get through a stressful time. So compounds with sulfur is our preference. So an NPK product plus S. Now you have to watch out for the allowance for P, given the regulation, but that's what we would like to go onto grazing ground to help deal with the stressful situation the plant is more than likely going to face in the next while. We are in the period, it's early June now. We are in the period when the plant goes to head naturally, but where you have more stress-induced grass because of soil moisture deficits, the likelihood of the other tillers on the plants becoming stemmy and going to seed head will increase substantially the more the soil moisture deficit exists.
That's great, John. From 2018, we know that farmers that acted quickly were the ones that fared better. What are the key management practices to get through this period?
Yeah, people have to remember what happened in 2018 and take the lessons from it. And you're right, those who acted early came out better out of it. Those who protected grass supply on the farm and protected growth on the farm and acted early, held on to grass way longer, and then because they did that, they didn't have the additional costs of extra meal and extra silage, which are way higher cost feeds than grass. So, even a round bale of silage is 2 or 3 times the cost of grazed grass. So we must try and, at this point, as we enter into soil moisture deficits getting worse all the time, we must try and protect growth on the farm. And you mentioned earlier about matching demand of the farm with the potential growth on the farm. So obviously growth conditions are going to become more and more restricted. So we have to, whole grass supply on the farm as much as possible, keep the rotation lengths to 25 days, thereabouts. Hold on to as much grass as we can within reason, because grass grows grass. More grass traps more dew. Grass, whereas grass supply on the farm responds better to fertilizer too when the rain comes. So, all those things at this point in time, as we enter into drought conditions, is about protecting growth in the farm, protecting grass supply in the farm, taking the actions. So for some, it'll be bringing some of the forward animals or bulls in for fattening into the shed, thereby taking pressure off the farm. Another, in terms of stocking rate, other scenarios will be bringing in other grass from maybe another farm, right, or or getting grass from somewhere else, or grazing some silage ground that's not too high in yield, or for some people then it'll be feeding silage to existing animals on the farm to just take the pressure off the grass supply for the other animals on the farm. So you have to prioritise which animals deserve the grass and which animals will, make do with round bale silage or other silage or hay.
Some key actions that farmers need to take with current drought conditions on farm. Thanks, John, for joining me on the show. That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to John for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook page. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.